and a row over badgers, a bit of a set to about badgers at the BBC. A 70-year-old Somerset farmer was speaking to a BBC filmmaker in his farmyard as a vet condemned yet another of his prize Guernsey cows to the abattoir. It had tested positive for bovine TB. With TV coverage of the issue normally dwelling on cuddly images of the furry animals, it was a rare opportunity to hear from farmers who lose around 30,000 cattle a year to the disease. It was broadcast by BBC Two last week in a documentary about Country Life magazine, and it's now led to a war of words between animal rights campaigners and the BBC, enraging the band of activists who class themselves as badger lovers. What was it that farmer Maurice Durbin said as he saw yet another prize cow unfortunately meet its early demise? He said he'd like to kick, pardon my language, bloody badgers for infecting his cattle with TB. I want to kick those bloody badgers for... I won't go on and on, I know it's a bit of a rude word. Not rude, a bit offensive. It's not rude, offensive. Infecting his cattle with TB. Well, the Badger Trust has sent a letter to Lord Hall. He's, of course, the BBC's DG, talking about institutional bias and grossly misrepresenting the truth. Really? Dominic Dyer is Chief Executive of the Badger Trust. Good morning, Mr. Dyer. If you'd lost a number of cattle, surely you'd be pretty concerned about it.
Well, I think the BBC was right in this programme to focus on Maurice Durbin's, problems with cows. It's a big social economic difficulty for farmers dealing with bovine TB. They didn't give the facts to the viewers. At the moment, we spent £25 million killing 4,200 plus badgers.
Hang on. It wasn't a program. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Dyer. It wasn't a programme about badger culling. It just touched on badger culling as part.
About bovine TB,
no, as part of the.
It needed to.
It's a documentary on. Oh boy, it's a documentary on country life. Right, exploring all the aspects. Of course, bovine TB is an aspect, but it is not a half-an-hour show solely about bovine TB.
But it was a 15 minutes of an hour programme, and if you watched it, and if you'd taken the time to watch it, you would have come away with a view that badgers were solely to blame for TB in that man's herd, and that's just not the case.
How do you know?
There's no evidence to indicate that. We know that none of the badgers that have been killed by the government for £25 million of cost to you, the taxpayer, have been tested for TB. We know that the last Labour government killed 11,000 of them, and only found 1.65% had late-stage TB where they were
why are this farmers' cattle getting TB?
Because the testing, and let's be clear about this, the vet in the programme talked at some length about the TB testing method he was using, but what he didn't say is that it's inaccurate, and about 1 in 4 cattle don't show up on the test and remain in the herd spreading the disease. So what we have in a situation like this with farms up and down the country, with animals kept inside for long periods of time, they're spreading the disease to cattle, and it's not the badger's fault. And the viewers must get that over to them, and it's important the BBC remains unbiased in this area.
But I've got a note here that 4,000 badgers have been shot in the past 3 years in Somerset, Gloucestershire and Dorset in the cull, which is initiated by the government. And bovine TB hasn't been stopped. Of course, it hasn't been eradicated, but it has been halted, in part delayed and halted. The numbers are down. So the cull works.
Sorry, that's wrong, Nick. The TB mapping data that DEFRA provides shows actually that TB levels in and around those culling zones in some areas are actually increasing. What we're actually seeing is we're more regularly testing cattle, so we're actually finding where the disease is. The government yesterday introduced new rules where if you actually move a cow from a high-risk area to a low-risk area, you have to put in tighter test and movement controls. We accept the need for those. They're very useful, and they can really get control of this disease. What we're saying is that this farmer has a massive problem. It was right that the programme makers focused on it, but to demonise badgers is very wrong because these animals are protected by law. We lose 10,000 a year to police estates from illegal persecution. We're worried that farmers will take the law into their own hands as a result of watching this and kill more of them.
But this man, I read, and again, I don't know him, but this farmer apparently has had his farm shut down for most of the last 6 years due to bovine TB. Surely he's allowed to express...
That's not... Sorry, Nick, that's not right.
I'm sorry, the editor of Country Life... All right, so let's just get this right. The BBC is wrong and Country Life is wrong, and you're right.
Sorry, I can send you the link to where he was exhibiting his...
Well, no, I'm reading the letter from the editor of Country Life.
I'm telling you now that only part of this farm was shut down. What you've said to me is what the viewers would have got from the programme, but it's not right. Part of his farm was restricted in terms of access of cows coming in and out. The other part was not, and he's still able to move cows and exhibit cows at shows around the country.
Mark Hedges, the editor of Country Life, says there is evidence farms in Somerset are now free of TB for the first time in years.
Well, the chief veterinary officer at DEFRA doesn't believe that. The chief scientific officer at DEFRA doesn't believe that. So if Mark Hedges has more expertise and knowledge than them, then I'd be very, very surprised. What he's doing is...
Lastly, what do you think will happen? You see a farmer say, I could kick those bee badgers, I want to kick the bee badgers. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think people are going to go out and start kicking badgers as a result?
I can tell you what's going to happen, because I was down doing an investigation with Sky News in 2013, and we found 14 farmers in Somerset in that area were illegally killing badgers. They admitted to it, they were sharing information of it, they were taking
but they're not going to
carbon monoxide.
They would already be doing that, wouldn't they? They're not going to be influenced by one farmer in Somerset doing it.
It makes demonisation of the species, increases the level of illegal persecution. There's a 6-month prison sentence and a £5,000 fine under the Protection of Badger Act if you tamper with a set or kill a badger. We saw 10,000 badgers killed last year, and many landowners and farmers were directly responsible. The BBC have basically given a green light to illegal persecution and wildlife crime. That is wrong. That's why we've written to the Director General, and that's why we want urgent action to address this problem.
So you do accept that badgers are in part to blame, or you don't even see that?
Badgers have an impact on the spread of disease between badgers. The question is, do they pass it to cows? There's no evidence that can easily happen because at the end of the day, we believe it could be down to urine, it could be down to the fact they defecate on pasture. But all the evidence we've seen is that most cows avoid badgers and badgers avoid cows. So there's little evidence to show us where this transmission is coming from. We do know, though, that over 96% of transmissions is cow to cow, and the government confirmed that through their own data as well.
Dominic Dyer is Chief Executive of the Badger Trust.